On the morning of March 14, 1991, Stage 7 at the Burbank Studios lot was scheduled for a standard fight choreography rehearsal. 41 members of Steven Seagal's stunt crew had arrived by 7 in the morning. The grip tables were loaded. The crash mats were laid in a double row along the eastern wall. Coffee was cooling in paper cups on a folding table near the loading bay doors. And the overhead industrial lights were flooding the concrete floor with the flat, unromantic light that working film sets run on. Steven Seagal was 38 years old. He stood 6 feet 4 inches and weighed 235 pounds at the time of this story. He held a 7th degree black belt in Aikido, a rank he had earned in Japan under Koichi Tohei. A man who did not give that rank away. He had trained for 11 years in Osaka. He had run his own dojo in Los Angeles. He spoke Japanese with native fluency. He was not a manufactured action figure. He was a genuine martial artist who had done something almost no Westerner of his generation had managed. He had earned respect inside Japan's closed system, then brought it home. His first 4 films had grossed a combined total of $312 million at the domestic box office. He was, by almost any reasonable measure, formidable, but on that morning in Burbank, the thing that made Steven Seagal dangerous was not his technique. It was his certainty. He had spent a decade being the most skilled man in every room he entered. That certainty had hardened into something else. It had become the lens through which he measured everyone around him. In 16 seconds, that lens was going to shatter. Nobody on Stage 7 that morning knew they were about to watch something that stunt coordinators and martial artists would still be describing to each other 30 years later, in dojos and green rooms and film school bars, in a story that would grow and compress and shift in the telling but never quite disappear. The man who walked through the loading bay door at 7:42 in the morning did not look like the reason. He was wearing a gray canvas jacket over a white shirt, the collar open, dark trousers, shoes that had walked a lot of floors. He was 41 years old, 5 feet 10 inches, and 178 pounds on a morning when he was not trying to impress anyone. He carried nothing. He moved the way a man moves when he has been moving like that for 30 years and stopped thinking about it. He had driven himself to the lot. He had not brought an assistant. He was there because a mutual acquaintance in the industry had asked him, as a courtesy, to observe a training session and offer a word to the crew if anything useful came to him. He was there as a guest. He sat in the 3rd row of folding chairs along the northern wall, behind the camera operators and the script supervisor. And he accepted a cup of coffee from a production assistant, who did not appear to recognize him. He pulled the canvas jacket closed against the chill of the lot's air handling, and he watched. His name, for those who need reminding, was Chuck Norris. If you want to know what happened in those 16 seconds, and you do want to know, because what happened in those 16 seconds on Stage 7 tells you something true about the difference between skill and certainty, then stay with this. And before we go any further, if you are watching this on a channel you found recently, make sure you are subscribed right now, because next week, we are going to talk about a confrontation on a New York film set that went even further than this one did. Subscribe, and drop in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Steven Seagal entered the floor at 8:15. He ran the crew through a standard warm-up sequence for 11 minutes. His technique was real. That needs to be said plainly, because what follows only means anything if you understand that the man could move. His entries were clean. His wrist controls were fast and efficient. He demonstrated a kote gaishi variation on his lead stunt double, a former collegiate wrestler named Dale Harding. And the technique landed correctly at 3/4 speed. The crew was attentive. The mood was professional. It was during the break at 8:47 that Seagal noticed the man in the gray jacket in the 3rd row. One of the stunt coordinators, a man named Ray Parra who had worked with both of them at different points in the decade, had walked over to say hello to the visitor and returned to the floor. Seagal watched that exchange. He asked Parra something. Parra answered. Seagal was quiet for a moment. Then he walked to the center of the floor and said, loudly enough that the full crew could hear it clearly, words that were not an invitation and were not quite a threat but were exactly what falls between those two things. He said, "Chuck Norris is here." Chuck, since you're watching, why don't you come show us what Texas karate looks like? Or are you better as an audience? There were 41 people on that floor. 37 of them, by Ray Parra's count, stopped moving within 2 seconds of those words leaving Seagal's mouth. The grip table went quiet, the camera operators turned. Dale Harding, who was still adjusting the tape on his wrist, stopped adjusting the tape on his wrist. The phrase Texas karate was not accidental. It was the specific phrase a man uses when he wants to diminish something without appearing to diminish it. Seagal knew what he was doing with that phrase. He had chosen it. In the third row of folding chairs, Chuck Norris set his paper cup down on the concrete floor beside his chair. He set it down with care, not speed. He did not look around the room. He looked at Steven Seagal. He stood up. He removed the canvas jacket. He folded it once along its length, then once across, and he set it on the chair he had been sitting in. He walked to the edge of the crash mat, and he stopped there and looked at Seagal from a distance of approximately 22 feet, and his face held an expression that none of the witnesses would later be able to describe with much precision. Not anger, not amusement, something quieter than both. The room understood something before he had moved a single step onto that mat. Ray Parra said later that the recognition spread through the crew the way pressure spreads through water, not from any one point but everywhere at once. The stunt doubles who had only seen Chuck Norris in film knew who he was. The ones who had trained in competition circuits in the 70s knew exactly who he was. Parra himself had seen Norris fight twice in the early tournament years. He knew what was about to happen. He said later that he briefly considered saying something to intervene and then decided, with a clarity that surprised him, that he had no standing to intervene and that whatever was about to happen needed to happen. Chuck Norris stepped onto the mat. He has already lost. He just does not know it yet. A fight is not a collision between two people. A fight is a problem of distance, and the person who manages distance manages everything that follows. Distance determines which tools are available, which angles exist, which timing windows open and close. The person who controls distance does not react to the fight, they conduct it. Chuck Norris stopped 11 feet from Steven Seagal. That distance was not accidental. At 11 feet, Seagal's Aikido entries, which depend on closing to contact range quickly and controlling the opponent's wrist or elbow as an opening, required him to cross 11 feet of open floor first. At 11 feet, that crossing was itself a commitment, and a commitment, if you know it is coming, is a door. Seagal moved. Second one. Seagal crossed the distance in 2 steps, his right hand extending toward Norris's left wrist in a standard I-Hanmi entry, the kind of entry that had thrown Dale Harding cleanly 7 times in the past hour. The hand moved to where Chuck Norris's wrist was. Chuck Norris's wrist was no longer there. He had moved 3 inches to the outside, a rotation from the hip, nothing theatrical. And the hand found air. There were 37 people not breathing. Second 4, Seagal adjusted. He was fast. That is important. He was genuinely fast, and he reset to a left forward position and drove a second entry. This one aimed at Norris's collar, a higher target, harder to vacate. He covered the distance correctly. What he did not account for was that Norris had moved forward into the entry rather than away from it, which collapsed the range to 0 before the hand arrived at full extension. You cannot apply a wrist control or a collar grab at 0 range. The technique dissolved on contact. Seagal found himself close to a man who was already somewhere slightly different from where he had been. Dale Harding, from the edge of the mat, did not move. He said later that he felt as though the floor had shifted slightly beneath him, not physically but in the way that watching something you cannot categorize makes you re-examine your footing. Ray Parra had both hands flat on the equipment case beside him. He did not move them for the duration of what followed. Second 9. This was the moment. Seagal loaded for a third entry, his most committed attempt. Weight shifted, momentum organized, and in the space between his decision to move and his body completing that decision, Chuck Norris was inside his guard. Not past it. Inside it. At a range where Seagal's longer arms and his technique system offered him nothing. and where the right knee of a man who had fought competitively for 11 years was positioned at the outer edge of Seagal's lead leg, with a precision that contained within it the full arithmetic of how this was going to end. The motion Norris made in second 9 and second 10 was small, a shift of weight, a rotation, a single controlled extension at the knee. Steven Seagal went to the floor. He did not fall dramatically. He went to the floor the way a very large and very competent man goes to the floor when a technique is applied correctly, with the confused efficiency of a body that has been moved by something it did not account for. He landed on his right side, on the crash mat. The room was completely silent for a duration that Ray Parra estimated at between 2 and 3 seconds, but which several other witnesses placed closer to 5. Chuck Norris stood over him. He was not in a fighting stance. He was just standing. He had thrown nothing at power. He had landed nothing in the sense of striking. He had moved, and Steven Seagal was on the floor. He extended his right hand. This is the part of the story that the people who carried it forward disagreed about most, which is itself a kind of testimony. Some said Seagal looked at the hand for a long moment before taking it. Some said he took it immediately. Dale Harding said the thing he remembered most was not the hand or the floor, but the specific quiet of that stage in the 2 seconds before anyone allowed themselves to speak. He said it was the quietest sound he had ever heard on a working film set. Norris helped Seagal to his feet. He held him by the forearm, not the hand, which in the training tradition both men had come through is the grip of one practitioner toward another. He said something to him. 4 words, spoken at a volume that only Seagal heard. No one on stage 7 has ever reported those 4 words with any confidence. Parra believed the first word was "your." Harding believed the last word was different. Beyond that, the sentence has not survived. Steven Seagal stood at the fork in the road that every man stands at when something he was certain of has just been revised in front of witnesses. He looked at the crew, 41 people who had watched everything. He said, "That is what I brought you here to see." He left the mat and walked to the equipment table at the south wall and picked up a towel and did not return to the floor for 14 minutes. When he did return, the rehearsal continued. The session ended at 12:30. Nothing was said publicly. The story moved the way those stories moved from Parra to 2 colleagues by the end of the week. From them outward through the training circuits and the stunt community through the months that followed, arriving in different rooms in different configurations but always with the same 16 seconds at its center. Chuck Norris picked up his canvas jacket from the folding chair. He did not say goodbye to the full crew. He said something to Ray Parra at the edge of the stage, and Parra nodded. He walked out through the loading bay door at 12:34. 3 witnesses, independently, reported that as he passed, Parra placed one hand briefly on the shoulder of the gray jacket. Parra confirmed this when asked. He said he did it without deciding to. He said he needed to confirm the man had been real. The stunt coordinator on that production retired in 2011. In a trade publication interview 2 years later, he referenced a training session in Burbank without using any names, describing something he called the cleanest 16 seconds of applied distance management he had seen in 40 years of working around trained people. He said he thought about it when he was teaching new people. He said it was the best argument he had ever witnessed for the proposition that certainty is not the same thing as skill. That is the lesson Stage 7 carried out of itself that morning. Not that one man was better than another, not that one art was superior to another art. The lesson was simpler and harder than either of those things. The story a man tells himself about what he can do under pressure and what he can actually do under pressure are written in different languages. Most men spend their whole lives never finding out that they have been reading the wrong one. Chuck Norris never told this story. He did not tell it because he had already known it before he walked onto that mat. The ones who tell the story are always the ones who watched. Next time we are going to talk about the night on a Manhattan film set in the winter of 1987 when a director who had won 2 Academy Awards told Chuck Norris he was replaceable, and what the producer sitting in the next room heard through the wall in the 40 seconds that followed. That story starts where this one ends, with a room that went quiet.